I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. You won't believe how quickly someone you thought loved you can turn against you when money is involved. The Texas sun beat down on the 500 acres of the Bennett estate as I gazed out my study window. Oil derricks dotted the landscape like mechanical giants, pumping the black gold that had been my family's fortune for 3 generations. My grandfather had started with nothing but determination and a lucky strike. And now the Bennett Oil Company was worth $80 million. Not that you'd know it by looking at me. At 68, I preferred sensible shoes to designer labels and rarely bothered with makeup these days. "Mrs. Bennett, I've brought your tea," said Martha, my housekeeper of 20 years. "Thank you, Martha. Just leave it on the desk." I didn't turn from the window. These past 5 years since Richard died, I'd found myself staring at those oil derricks more and more. They were constant, reliable. Unlike family. Martha hesitated at the door. "Will you be needing anything else, ma'am?" "No, that's all for now." I finally turned to her with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Actually, has Andrew called today?" Martha's expression said everything before she spoke. "No, ma'am, not today." I nodded, dismissing her with a wave. My son hadn't called in 3 weeks, not since our last argument about Victoria's birthday party. I wasn't invited, of course. 5 years of marriage to my son, and Victoria still treated me like an inconvenience rather than family. The mansion felt too large these days, all 14 rooms of it with hand-carved mahogany, crystal chandeliers, and Persian rugs that were worth more than most people's cars. Richard and I had filled it with laughter once, and then Andrew's childhood had brought more joy. Now it echoed with emptiness, a museum to a family that was fracturing before my eyes. I settled at my desk, reviewing the quarterly reports from our oil fields. 30 years as a prosecutor had taught me to read between the lines, to spot inconsistencies and lies. I'd retired when Richard got sick, but those skills never left me. The company was doing well, despite the volatility in oil prices. Not that Andrew showed much interest. He'd always been more concerned with spending money than understanding how it was made. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway caught my attention. I wasn't expecting visitors. Rising from my chair, I moved to the bay windows and saw Andrew's black BMW coming up the circular drive. My heart leapt before caution tempered my excitement. My son rarely visited without wanting something, even from a distance. I could see the tension in his shoulders as he slammed the car door. Andrew had always been handsome in that polished prep school way, tall with Richard's strong jaw and my dark eyes. But lately, something had changed. His usual confidence had been replaced by a jittery energy that made me uneasy. I returned to my desk, pretending to be absorbed in my work when he burst in without knocking. "Mom," he said, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. "We need to talk." I set down my reading glasses and studied my son's face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and there was a tremor in his hands that he tried to hide by shoving them in his pockets. "Of course, sweetheart. Sit down." I gestured to the leather chair across from my desk. "You look terrible. Is everything all right?" "Thanks for the pep talk," Andrew muttered, collapsing into the chair. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand up even more. "Look, I'm going to cut straight to the chase. I need money. A lot of money. Here we go again." I kept my expression neutral, though my heart sank. Andrew's business ventures had a history of requiring my financial intervention. His last startup, some sort of app for rating restaurants, had cost me $300,000 before folding spectacularly. Before that, it was a clothing line that never made it past the design phase. How much, I asked, though I suspected I wouldn't like the answer. $100,000. The number hung in the air between us like smoke from a gunshot. It was more than he'd ever asked for at once. And the way he said it, like he was ordering coffee, set off every alarm bell in my head. "That's a substantial amount. Andrew, what's this venture?" "It's a tech startup," he said, the words coming out in a practiced rush. "A revolutionary online marketing platform that's going to change everything. My partner has connections with Fortune 500 companies, and we're projecting 7-figure profits in the first year alone." I'd heard variations of this song before, and it never ended well. Who's your partner? Andrew's eyes flickered away from mine. You don't know him. He's from California. Tech background. Proven track record. What's his name? Mom. Why does it matter? Andrew snapped, leaning forward. The opportunity is what's important here. You wouldn't understand the technical aspects anyway. The evasion was telling. In my years as a prosecutor, I'd learned to recognize the sound of lies being born. Andrew was hiding something, and whatever it was, it required $100,000 to fix. Andrew, we've had this conversation before, multiple times. I've supported your business dreams generously, and none of them have succeeded. Perhaps it's time you tried building something with your own resources. The transformation was immediate and frightening. Andrew's face darkened, and his hands clenched into fists on his lap. For a moment, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of his father in our worst moments, right before I divorced Richard for his attempt to manipulate me out of my inheritance. My own resources. Andrew's voice rose to a near shout. What resources? Mom, I'm drowning here. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in the shadow of all this? He gestured wildly at the opulent study around us. Everyone expects me to be successful because I'm a Bennett, but how can I compete when you control everything? I've given you every advantage, I said quietly, keeping my voice level even as my pulse quickened. The best schools, connections, startup capital, advantages. Andrew laughed bitterly. You've given me just enough to fail spectacularly, just enough to make me look like a spoiled rich kid who can't make it on his own, but never enough to actually succeed. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. I had been careful about how much money I gave Andrew, perhaps too careful, but I'd seen too many wealthy families destroyed by children who never learned the value of work. Blake, calm down. Let's discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss. He stood up so abruptly that his chair rocked backward. I need that money and I need it now. This isn't a request. Mom, it's a necessity. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. This wasn't the petulant demand of a spoiled child. This was something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to a threat. The answer is no. Andrew, I won't be investing in another one of your ventures. He stared at me, his breathing heavy, and then something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed, calculating. Give me the money, Mom, he said, his voice suddenly soft and menacing. You'll soon die anyway. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son wanted me dead, not just in the abstract way that heirs sometimes anticipate inheritance, but in a concrete, immediate way that chilled me to the bone. Andrew Bennett, I said. My prosecutor's voice emerging, steady and hard. I think you should leave now. He stood there for a moment longer, and then his face changed again, a mask slipping into place. I didn't mean that. I'm just stressed. It's been tough at home. But it was too late. I'd seen what lay beneath the mask, and I couldn't unsee it. Is there something you're not telling me? I asked carefully. Are you in some kind of trouble? For just a moment, his mask slipped completely. I saw fear there, and desperation, and something that looked like genuine panic. Then the cold expression returned, and he headed for the door. Forget I asked, he said without turning around. I'll figure it out myself. As Andrew's BMW roared down the driveway, kicking up gravel and dust, I sat alone in my study, feeling like I'd just dodged a bullet I didn't understand. Something was very wrong with my son. And whatever it was, it required $100,000 to solve. I picked up the phone to call my private investigator, then set it down again. Andrew was my son, my flesh and blood. Whatever trouble he was in, we could work through it together. That decision would nearly cost me my life. The next morning, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me after Andrew's visit. I found myself jumping at small noises and double-checking that the doors were locked, habits from my days prosecuting dangerous criminals. My son's words kept echoing in my mind. You'll soon die anyway. I tried to rationalize it as stress, a terrible slip of the tongue, but my instincts, The same ones that had helped me put away countless criminals were screaming that something was deeply wrong. Over breakfast, I called Jonathan Hayes, an old friend who'd worked with me in the prosecutor's office. "Gloria." His familiar voice was warm with surprise. "It's been too long. How are you?" "I've been better, John," I admitted, cradling my coffee cup. "I'm wondering if you could do me a favor." Discreetly. "Name it." "My son Andrew came to me yesterday, asking for a large sum of money. Something about his behavior worried me. Could you look into his finances, see if he's in some kind of trouble?" There was a pause on the line. "This is serious. Gloria, are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm not sure of anything anymore," I said, watching an oil derrick rise and fall in the distance. "But something isn't right, and I need to know what I'm dealing with. I'll see what I can find out. In the meantime, be careful. Gloria, family disputes can turn ugly fast." After hanging up, I tried to focus on normal activities, reviewing company reports, planning the garden renovation, anything to keep my mind off the growing knot of dread in my stomach. But every time the phone rang or a door closed, I found myself tensing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It happened 2 days later. I was in the garden, pruning roses that had been my solace since Richard died, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again, rising from my knees. I brushed dirt from my gardening pants and peered around the hedgerow to see Andrew's BMW again, but this time, Victoria was with him. They emerged from the car with a choreographed precision that immediately put me on alert. Victoria was striking as always, tall and slender with flawless dark skin, high cheekbones, and the kind of presence that commanded attention in any room. Her cream-colored dress probably cost more than most people earned in a week, and her makeup was perfect despite the early hour. Everything about their arrival felt staged, the timing exactly 10:00 a.m. Not early enough to seem overeager, not late enough to appear disrespectful. Victoria's pristine appearance, and the careful way Andrew guided her up the path, like actors hitting their marks. I retreated to the kitchen, quickly washed my hands, and tried to compose myself. The doorbell rang just as I was drying my hands on a dish towel. "Mother," Andrew said when I opened the door, his voice carrying a forced warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry we didn't call ahead. Victoria had the lovely idea to bring you breakfast." Victoria stepped forward with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Gloria, darling, it's been too long." She air-kissed near my cheek, her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming me. "I brought coffee from that boutique shop downtown, the Ethiopian blend with Madagascar vanilla you mentioned liking once." I had never mentioned liking such a blend, which was the first red flag. The second was the way Victoria was watching me, with an intensity that felt predatory, like a cat watching a mouse approach a trap. "How thoughtful," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "Let's take it in the kitchen. I was just gardening, so please excuse my appearance." "You look wonderful as always, Mother," Andrew said. Another false note. He'd been criticizing my dowdy gardening clothes for years. In the kitchen, Victoria set down a tray holding 2 steaming cups of coffee in delicate china mugs that looked suspiciously like ones from my own cabinet. She must have brought them in from the car while I was washing up. "I made this just for you," Victoria said, extending one of the cups toward me with a smile. "I hope you enjoy it." The coffee smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, but sharp and bitter with an underlying chemical odor that reminded me of almonds mixed with something medicinal. After 30 years of prosecuting criminals, including several poisoning cases, I recognized the scent of cyanide, subtle but distinct to a trained nose. Every nerve in my body was screaming that something was off, but I kept my expression neutral as I accepted the cup, noting how Victoria was watching me with an intensity that felt distinctly sinister. "How thoughtful of you, dear," I said, studying her face. "Won't you join me?" "Oh, I've already had my morning coffee," Victoria said, touching her stomach lightly. "Too much caffeine makes me jittery." Andrew lingered by the kitchen doorway, and I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes. His usual nervous energy had been replaced by a strange stillness that made him look like he was holding his breath. When I glanced at him, he quickly looked away, focusing on his phone with obvious discomfort. "Blake tells me you two had a little disagreement the other day," Victoria said. settling gracefully into the chair across from me. About business opportunities and family support. The way she said family support made it sound like an obligation rather than a choice. I noticed she hadn't taken a sip of her coffee yet, despite encouraging me to drink mine. We had a discussion about financial boundaries, I said carefully. Andrew has some wonderful entrepreneurial energy, but I think it's important for him to develop his own resources. Of course, Victoria agreed, her smile never wavering. Independence is so important, though it can be challenging when family members have such different perspectives on success. When Victoria turned slightly to glance at Andrew, I made a split-second decision that would save my life. Using the moment when her attention was diverted, I quickly switched our cups. They were identical white china mugs, and the exchange took less than 2 seconds. Andrew's told me so much about his latest venture, I said, testing to see how much Victoria knew about her husband's mysterious business partner. It sounds very promising. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, surprise, maybe, or annoyance. Yes, he's very excited about the potential, and his partner Andrew mentioned someone from California with tech experience. Victoria hummed non-committally, raising her cup, which was now my original one, to her lips. Innovation is so important in today's market. Don't you think? We chatted about meaningless things while I pretended to sip my coffee and watched Victoria take her first real drink. Her face twisted slightly, like she tasted something unpleasant, and I saw her eyes widen with what looked like confusion, but she said nothing about the flavor, which was telling. This is delicious, I lied, setting my cup down after another fake sip. You'll have to tell me where you found this blend. The shop on Elm Street, Victoria said absently, and I could see her mind working, trying to process something that didn't make sense to her. Andrew was checking his watch with increasing frequency, and there was a tension in the room that felt like a storm building on the horizon. Whatever they'd come here to accomplish wasn't going according to plan. 20 minutes later, Victoria started coughing. It began as a small, polite clearing of her throat, but quickly escalated into deep, violent spasms that shook her entire body. Her face flushed red, then began taking on a grayish pallor that made her look genuinely ill. "Something's wrong," she gasped, gripping the edge of the table as the coughing grew worse. Her voice was becoming hoarse and strained. I can't breathe properly." Andrew rushed over from his position by the door, his concern appearing genuine, or at least well acted. "Victoria, what's happening? Are you having an allergic reaction?" "Hospital," she wheezed, her breathing becoming increasingly labored. "Need to go to the hospital now." As we rushed to prepare for the emergency room, Victoria leaning heavily on Andrew while making appropriately distressed noises, one thought kept repeating in my mind that coffee had been meant for me. My loving daughter-in-law had just poisoned herself with her own murder weapon. The irony was so perfect it almost made me smile. The drive to Mercy General Hospital was tense, with Victoria in the passenger seat of Andrew's BMW making increasingly dramatic sounds of distress. I sat in the back, outwardly concerned but inwardly analyzing every detail of what had just happened. Victoria's symptoms were consistent with cyanide poisoning, the respiratory distress, the burning sensation she kept mentioning, the blotchy skin. The almond smell in the coffee had confirmed my suspicions. Someone had done their homework on poisons that were fast-acting and difficult to detect without specific tests. If she'd given me the full dose intended for my body weight, I would likely be dead by now instead of watching this performance unfold. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Andrew asked for the third time in 10 minutes, his voice pitched perfectly between concern and panic. "Just hold on. We're almost there." "Burns," Victoria managed to gasp between coughing fits. "My throat is burning." I leaned forward slightly. "Victoria, are you allergic to anything in coffee milk? Perhaps, or a flavoring?" She shook her head violently, then locked eyes with me in the rearview mirror. Even through her apparent suffering, I caught a flash of calculation that chilled me. The emergency room at Mercy General was controlled chaos, with the usual mix of genuine emergencies and worried parents with children in tow. Victoria's condition was dramatic enough to get immediate attention. Her coughing and gasping for breath were certainly convincing. "We need help." Andrew called out as we entered, supporting his wife, who was now making choking sounds that would have been alarming if they weren't so perfectly timed. "My wife can't breathe." The medical team responded with impressive efficiency. Within minutes, Victoria was on a gurney, hooked up to monitors, and surrounded by nurses taking vitals and asking rapid-fire questions. "When did the symptoms start?" Dr. Eliza Washington asked, a competent-looking woman with close-cropped hair and a no-nonsense manner. "About 30 minutes ago," Andrew answered, playing the role of concerned husband to perfection. "She was fine this morning, then suddenly started coughing and having trouble breathing after we had coffee at my mother's house." "Any known allergies, medications, recent changes in diet or environment?" "Nothing," Andrew said, shaking his head. "She's always been perfectly healthy." I watched this exchange with growing fascination. Andrew was answering all the questions smoothly, never hesitating, never appearing uncertain. Either he was remarkably calm under pressure, or he'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "Doctor," Washington looked at me. "Your family." "I'm her mother-in-law," I said. "We were having coffee together when she became ill." "Did you drink the same coffee?" "Similar," I said carefully. "Victoria prepared it. 2 cups from the same pot." "And you're feeling fine?" "Completely normal," I confirmed. Dr. Washington made a note on her clipboard, and I could see the wheels turning in her medical mind. One person getting sick after consuming the same substance suggested either an allergic reaction or something more targeted. "Mrs. Bennett," Dr. Washington addressed Victoria directly. "Can you tell me what you were doing just before the symptoms started?" "Coffee," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. "Having coffee with her." Her eyes found mine across the small examination area, and the way she said "her" carried an unmistakable note of accusation. Even in her supposedly weakened state, Victoria was already laying groundwork for what was to come. Dr. Washington followed Victoria's gaze to me. "Did you prepare the coffee, Mrs. Bennett?" "No," I said firmly. "Victoria brought it to my house already prepared in a thermos. She poured it into cups." The doctor's expression remained neutral, but I sensed her suspicion shifting. "We're going to run some blood tests," she announced. "In the meantime, let's get you on oxygen and see if we can make you more comfortable." As the medical team worked on Victoria, Andrew pulled me aside. "Mom, I'm going to run home and get some of her things," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Pajamas, toiletries, you know how hospitals are." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, patting his arm while noting how quickly he was leaving his supposedly critically ill wife. "Take your time." Once Andrew left, I settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting area, surrounded by the familiar sounds of medical emergencies and human suffering. The magazines were outdated. The coffee in the vending machine looked terrible, and the fluorescent lighting made everyone look slightly dead. It was the perfect setting for contemplating attempted murder. 3 hours later, Andrew returned with an overnight bag, looking appropriately exhausted and worried. His timing was impeccable. He walked through the door just as Dr. Washington emerged from the treatment area with news. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her expression serious, "we've completed our initial tests on your wife." "How is she?" Andrew asked, his voice cracking convincingly. "Stable for now," Dr. Washington said, "but I need to speak with both of you privately." She led us to a small consultation room and closed the door before turning to face us. "We found traces of cyanide in Mrs. Bennett's bloodstream," Dr. Washington announced with clinical precision. "This appears to be deliberate poisoning. I'm required by law to contact the authorities." "Cyanide," Andrew repeated, his face going pale as he grabbed my arm as if seeking support. "Poisoning, but how? Who would do something like that?" Before Dr. Washington could answer, a weak voice called from the doorway where Victoria stood, supported by a nurse. She looked fragile and vulnerable in the hospital gown, but her eyes were clear and focused. "She did it," Victoria said, her finger pointing directly at me. "Gloria poisoned my coffee. She tried to kill me." The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Dr. Washington stared at me with a mixture of shock and suspicion while Andrew looked like he'd been slapped. "That's impossible," Andrew said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mom would never... She made the coffee herself, Victoria continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. She handed it to me personally. She watched me drink it. The irony was almost laughable. Here I'd inadvertently saved her life by switching cups, and she was repaying me by trying to frame me for attempted murder. That's absolutely false, I said, keeping my voice steady. Victoria brought the coffee to my house in a thermos. She poured it herself. I barely touched mine. Dr. Washington looked between us, clearly trying to determine who was telling the truth. The police will need statements from all of you. They should be here shortly. As if on cue, a tall man in a dark suit appeared at the door, holding up a badge. Detective Marcus Reynolds, Homicide Division. I need to speak with everyone involved in this incident. Detective Reynolds was younger than I'd expected for someone handling attempted murder cases. Maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every lie imaginable. Mrs. Bennett, he said, nodding to me. I'd like to start with you, privately, if you don't mind. As I followed Detective Reynolds to another consultation room, I caught Victoria's eyes. Despite her weakened state, there was a triumphant gleam there that sent a chill down my spine. She thought she had won. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The small room Detective Reynolds led me to was sterile and windowless, designed for delivering bad news and uncomfortable conversations. He gestured for me to sit, then took the chair opposite me. I want to be clear from the start. Mrs. Bennett, Detective Reynolds began, opening his notebook. You're not under arrest, and you're free to leave at any time. But I need to understand what happened here today. I took a deep breath and met his eyes directly. My son and daughter-in-law came to my house this morning, unannounced. Victoria brought coffee that she claimed was from a downtown shop. She'd already poured it into mugs, and when she offered me one, I noticed an unusual smell, like almonds, which I recognized from my days as a prosecutor as a potential indicator of cyanide. Detective Reynolds raised an eyebrow. You were a prosecutor. For 30 years, I confirmed. I handled several poisoning cases. That's why I recognized the smell. And what did you do when you noticed this smell? Here was the tricky part. I needed to be honest without seeming calculated. When Victoria wasn't looking, I switched our cups. I wasn't certain the coffee was poisoned. It seemed almost too bizarre to consider. But something felt wrong, and I've learned to trust my instincts. So you deliberately gave Mrs. Bennett a cup you suspected might contain poison. I wasn't sure it was poisoned, I clarified. I thought it might be, and switching the cups was a way to test my suspicion without creating a scene if I was wrong. When Victoria began showing symptoms, I realized my instinct had been correct. Detective Reynolds made notes, his expression revealing nothing. Why would your daughter-in-law want to poison you, Mrs. Bennett? I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal about Andrew's recent visit and demand for money. I didn't want to implicate my son without being certain of his involvement, but I needed to provide context. My son Andrew asked me for a large sum of money 2 days ago, $100,000 for a business venture. I refused. He was unusually angry about it. Do you think your son was involved in this poisoning attempt? The question hung in the air between us. Was I ready to accuse my own son of attempted murder? I don't know, I said finally. I'd like to believe he wasn't, but his behavior has been concerning recently. Detective Reynolds nodded slowly. We'll need to search your home for evidence, Mrs. Bennett. Are you willing to consent to that? Of course, I said. I have nothing to hide. As Detective Reynolds continued questioning me about the events of the morning, I could hear Victoria's voice through the thin walls, weaving a convincing tale of victimhood that made me sound like a jealous, controlling mother-in-law who resented her son's wife. Gloria's always been cold toward me, Victoria was saying, her voice carrying clearly. She doesn't think I'm good enough for Andrew, doesn't think I deserve to be part of the Bennett family. Has she ever threatened you before? Detective Reynolds' partner asked. Not directly, Victoria replied. But there have been comments about how she controls the family money, about how people shouldn't get too comfortable in their positions. Each word was a carefully placed knife in my back. Victoria was painting a picture of a bitter, Controlling old woman who might poison her daughter-in-law out of jealousy and fear of losing control. It was brilliant character assassination, and from the murmurs of sympathy I could hear, it was working. When Detective Reynolds finished with me and moved on to interview Andrew, I sat alone in the consultation room, feeling the walls closing in. I needed to think strategically. Victoria and Andrew had clearly planned this carefully, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I'd spent 3 decades putting away criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. I knew how to build a case, and more importantly, I knew how to tear one apart. If my own son and his wife wanted to play this game, they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong opponent. As I left the consultation room, I passed Andrew in the hallway. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something there that broke my heart. Not remorse or shame, but calculation. My son was evaluating how well their plan was working, measuring my reaction against what they'd expected. In that moment, I realized the terrible truth the child I'd raised, the boy I'd loved more than anything in this world, was willing to see me imprisoned or dead for money. The pain of that betrayal was like nothing I'd ever experienced, but I forced it down, locked it away where it couldn't weaken me. I would grieve later. Right now, I needed to fight. Detective Marcus Reynolds stood in my kitchen, supervising as his forensics team moved methodically through my home. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea and watching strangers in latex gloves examine every surface where Victoria claimed I had prepared her poisoned coffee. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mrs. Bennett," Detective Reynolds said, his tone professional but guarded. "This should only take a few hours." I nodded, my prosecutor's mind already cataloging everything they were doing, what they touched, what they photographed, what they bagged as evidence. I knew this dance well, having choreographed it myself hundreds of times from the other side. The difference was that those cases had involved guilty people. I was innocent. "Detective," I said carefully, "I'd like to understand exactly what Mrs. Bennett is claiming happened." Reynolds studied me for a moment. "She states that you prepared coffee here in this kitchen, handed her a specific mug, and watched as she drank it. She claims you barely touched yours." I almost laughed at the irony. "That's exactly what happened, except she was the one who brought and prepared the coffee, not me. And yet only she became ill," Reynolds observed. "Because I switched the cups when she wasn't looking," I reminded him. "I suspected something was wrong with the coffee she handed me." "That's quite a leap, Mrs. Bennett, to suspect your daughter-in-law was trying to poison you." I met his gaze steadily. "In my 30 years as a prosecutor, I learned to trust my instincts. Something felt wrong from the moment they arrived. Their timing, their behavior, and most importantly, the distinct smell of almonds in that coffee. "Ma'am," one of the technicians called from across the kitchen, "can you show us where your coffee supplies are kept?" I led them to the pantry where Martha kept various coffee beans, filters, and accessories. Everything looked normal to me, but the technicians treated each item like potential evidence, carefully bagging and labeling anything that might have come into contact with poison. "What about cleaning supplies?" Detective Reynolds asked. "Anything that might contain chemical compounds." I showed them to the utility room where we kept the usual household chemicals, bleach, ammonia, drain cleaners, and various other toxic substances that could be found in any home. Again, they photographed and sampled everything. 2 hours into the search, I heard one of the technicians call out from the guest bathroom upstairs. "Detective Reynolds, you need to see this." The excitement in his voice made my stomach clench. I followed Detective Reynolds upstairs, dreading what they might have found. In the guest bathroom, a room I rarely used and hadn't entered in weeks, they discovered a small glass vial hidden behind the medicine cabinet. The vial contained traces of a clear liquid, and beside it was a handwritten list that included Victoria's name along with what appeared to be dosage calculations. "Mrs. Bennett," Detective Reynolds said, holding up an evidence bag containing the vial and list. "Can you explain these items?" I stared at the evidence, feeling the world tilt around me. The handwriting on the list looked remarkably similar to mine, though I had no memory of writing anything like it. The vial was completely unfamiliar. "I've never seen either of those items before," I said. my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "This is your handwriting, isn't it?" Reynolds insisted, showing me the list more closely, looking at it carefully. I had to admit that it did look like my handwriting, the formation of the letters, the particular way I crossed my T's and dotted my I's. Whoever had written this had either studied my writing extensively or was a very skilled forger. "It appears to be my handwriting," I admitted, "but I didn't write this. Someone is framing me." "That's quite an accusation. Mrs. Bennet, who would want to frame you?" The answer was obvious, but saying it aloud felt like tearing open my own heart. "My son and his wife. They came to me 2 days ago asking for $100,000. I refused. Today they brought poisoned coffee to my home, which Victoria accidentally drank herself when I switched our cups. And while we were at the hospital this morning, Andrew left for several hours, claiming he needed to get Victoria's belongings." I took a deep breath before delivering the most painful part. "He would have had access to my home during that time." Reynolds's eyebrows shot up. "Are you suggesting your son planted this evidence?" The words sounded insane even as I said them, but I couldn't ignore the obvious timeline. "I'm saying that someone with access to my house and knowledge of my handwriting could have placed these items here while we were at the hospital." Detective Reynolds studied me carefully. "Mrs. Bennet, that's a very serious accusation to make against your own son." "It's not an accusation," I replied evenly. "It's an observation about opportunity and access." But even as I said it, I could see the doubt in Reynolds's eyes. The grieving mother caught red-handed with evidence of attempted murder, trying to blame her innocent son. It was exactly the kind of desperate deflection that guilty people attempted when cornered. "We'll be taking these items for analysis," Reynolds said, sealing the evidence bags, "along with samples of your handwriting for comparison." "Of course." Reynolds paused, then asked, "Mrs. Bennet, do you own any firearms?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, I have a pistol in my bedroom safe." "Why?" "We'll need to examine that as well." I led them to my bedroom and opened the safe, revealing a .38 caliber revolver that Richard had insisted I keep for protection after he received death threats during a particularly contentious business deal. The gun was exactly where I'd left it, and I couldn't imagine how it related to a poisoning case. "Has this weapon been fired recently?" Reynolds asked. "Not in over a year. I occasionally take it to the shooting range for practice, but I haven't done that in months." They bagged the gun anyway, along with the box of ammunition from the safe. I was beginning to understand that in a criminal investigation, everything was potentially relevant until proven otherwise. As the search team finished their work, Detective Reynolds pulled me aside for a final conversation. "Mrs. Bennet, based on what we found today, I need to inform you that you're now considered a person of interest in this case. I strongly recommend that you contact an attorney." "Am I under arrest?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not at this time, but I advise you not to leave town without notifying my office." After the police left, I walked through my home, seeing it with new eyes. Rooms that had been photographed and searched, surfaces that had been dusted for fingerprints, possessions that had been examined for evidence of criminal intent. My sanctuary had been violated, and I felt like a stranger in my own house. But more than that, I felt the weight of betrayal settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Someone had planned this carefully, planting evidence that would point directly to me while creating a perfect cover story. And the only people who had the opportunity, access, and knowledge to do it were my own son and his wife. That night, I sat in my study with a glass of wine, staring at the oil derricks visible through my window. The mechanical pumps continued their steady rhythm, extracting wealth from the earth, just as they had for 3 generations. But for the first time since inheriting this empire, I wondered if it would all die with me. Andrew hadn't just tried to rob me. He and Victoria had tried to murder me and frame me for attempted murder. The complexity and cruelty of the plan took my breath away. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated their mother. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. "Jonathan Hayes speaking." "Jonathan, it's Gloria. I need your help. Someone's trying to destroy me, and I think it might be my own son." Jonathan Hayes arrived at my estate within the hour. looking much the same as he had during our prosecuting days. Silver hair neatly combed, sharp eyes missing nothing, and the purposeful stride of a man who never wasted time or motion. "Gloria," he said, embracing me briefly in the foyer. "I came as soon as I could." I led him to my study and poured us both a scotch, his preferred drink during our late-night case preparations years ago. As we settled into the leather chairs, I felt a strange comfort in the familiarity of the situation. Jonathan and I had tackled seemingly impossible cases together for decades. This would be our final one. "Tell me everything," he said, sipping his scotch. "Don't leave out a single detail." I recounted the entire sequence of events: Andrew's desperate request for money, Victoria's special coffee, the convenient evidence planted in my home, and Andrew's calculated betrayal during the police interviews. Jonathan listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each new detail. "Jesus Christ, Gloria," he said when I finished. "If Andrew and Victoria are behind this, we're dealing with attempted murder and conspiracy charges. This isn't just about money anymore." "I know. The question is how to prove it. First things first, you need criminal defense representation immediately. I'm going to call Samuel Montgomery. He's the best defense attorney in the state, and he owes me a favor from the Anderson case." I nodded, relieved. Samuel Montgomery was a legend in legal circles, ruthless, brilliant, and utterly devoted to his clients. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it would be him. "Jonathan, there's something else," I said, lowering my voice though we were alone in the house. "I think Andrew might be in serious trouble with dangerous people. The way he demanded that money, the desperation in his voice. This feels like more than just another failed business venture." "What kind of trouble?" "I don't know yet, but I want to find out. If Andrew is involved with criminals, it might explain why he's willing to go to such lengths." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him thinking. "I still have contacts in law enforcement. Let me make some discreet inquiries about Andrew's recent activities. But in the meantime, you need to assume you're under surveillance. Everything you do, everywhere you go, everyone you talk to. The police will be watching." "I understand. And be very careful around Andrew and Victoria. If they're willing to commit murder once, they won't hesitate to try again." His words sent a chill through me. My own son might still be actively trying to kill me. It seemed impossible, like something from a nightmare I couldn't wake from. "How did I miss this?" I asked, my voice breaking slightly. "How did I not see what my own son was becoming?" Jonathan's expression softened. "Don't do that to yourself, Gloria. You couldn't have known. Andrew fooled everyone, including me, and I'm trained to spot liars. But I'm his mother. I should have known. You saw what he wanted you to see. That's what good manipulators do. They show you the face you want to see while hiding their true intentions." Samuel Montgomery arrived at my house that evening carrying a briefcase and the kind of serious expression that defense attorneys wore when their clients were in deep trouble. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 50s, but Jonathan assured me that his age was offset by his brilliance and his complete lack of ethics when it came to protecting his clients. "Mrs. Bennett," Samuel said, settling into my study like he owned the place. "Jonathan has briefed me on your situation. You're in significant legal jeopardy, but the case against you has some interesting weaknesses." "Such as?" I asked, hope flickering for the first time. "For one, the poisoning appears to have been planned in advance, but you had no way of knowing that Andrew and Victoria would visit you this morning. If you were planning to poison your daughter-in-law, you would need advance notice of her presence. Unless the prosecution argues that I was planning to poison Andrew and Victoria was an accidental victim," I pointed out. Samuel nodded approvingly. "Exactly the kind of thinking that made you a good prosecutor. Yes, they could argue that. But there's another problem with their case motive. Why would you want to kill Andrew? He's your son and your only heir. His death would actually complicate your estate planning significantly." I thought about what Jonathan had told me about looking into Andrew's background, about the possibility of debts or threats, but decided to keep that information to myself for now. "What about Victoria? They could argue I wanted to eliminate her to protect Andrew's inheritance. Possibly, But that's a weak motive for murder. Wealthy families deal with gold-digging spouses through prenups and trusts. Not poison. Samuel opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about the evidence they found in your house. The vial and the handwritten list. I described the items in detail, emphasizing how the handwriting looked like mine, but that I had no memory of creating the list. The planted evidence is actually our strongest defense, Samuel said. It's almost too convenient. Real poisoners don't usually leave behind signed confessions with their victim's name and dosage calculations. What's our next step? We need to investigate Andrew and Victoria independently. If they're running a con, there will be evidence, financial records, communication patterns, possibly even previous victims. Previous victims, I repeated, confused. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. If your son is willing to murder his own mother for inheritance money, this probably isn't his first rodeo. People don't usually jump straight to matricide without working their way up through smaller crimes. The thought sent ice through my veins. You think they've done this before? I think we need to find out. Jonathan is already running background checks on both of them. If there are any red flags in their past, we'll find them. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. I'd installed a state-of-the-art security system years ago, but knowing that my son had keys and access codes made it feel useless. Around 300 I heard a car in my driveway. From my bedroom window, I could see Andrew's BMW parked near the front door. I watched as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, making phone calls and appearing agitated. Finally, he got out and approached the house. Instead of using his key, he knocked softly on the front door. When I didn't answer, he tried the handle and found it locked. He walked around the perimeter of the house, testing windows and checking for other entry points. This wasn't the behavior of a concerned son checking on his mother. This was reconnaissance. After 20 minutes, Andrew gave up and drove away. I immediately called Samuel. He was casing the house, I told him, my heart still racing. Looking for ways to get inside without using his key. Did you record any of this? The security cameras should have captured everything. Perfect. Don't touch those recordings. We'll need them if this goes to trial. I hung up, shaking. My own son had just been looking for a way to break into my house in the middle of the night. Whatever was driving him, money, fear, or something else entirely, had pushed him past the point of reason, past the point of humanity. For the first time, I truly understood that my son was gone, replaced by someone capable of murder. Someone I didn't know at all. The next morning brought more bad news. Detective Reynolds called to inform me that the preliminary forensics results had confirmed my fingerprints on the poison vial and that the handwriting analysis was consistent with my writing samples. Mrs. Bennett, Detective Reynolds said, I need you to come to the station for additional questioning. You have the right to have your attorney present. We'll be there this afternoon, I told him, then immediately called Samuel. They're moving faster than I expected, Samuel said, concern evident in his voice. This feels like they're building toward an arrest. We need to accelerate our own investigation. That afternoon, as Samuel and I sat in the police station waiting room, I felt the walls closing in around me. The evidence against me was circumstantial but compelling. I had means access to poison, opportunity preparing the coffee, and supposedly a motive protecting family wealth. The planted evidence provided the smoking gun that would convince a jury of my guilt. Mrs. Bennett, Detective Reynolds said when we were finally called into the interview room, we've received additional forensic results that I think you should be aware of. Samuel leaned forward slightly. What kind of results The poison found in Mrs. Bennett's bloodstream is an exact match for the substance in the vial recovered from Mrs. Bennett's home. We also found traces of the same substance on a coffee mug in Mrs. Bennett's kitchen. My heart sank. They'd found physical evidence linking me directly to the crime. Even if I could prove the evidence was planted, it would be difficult to convince a jury that someone had gone to such elaborate lengths to frame me. Detective Reynolds, Samuel said smoothly, my client maintains her innocence. This evidence is clearly the result of contamination or tampering. By whom? By the real perpetrator who had access to Mrs. Bennett's home while she was at the hospital. Detective Reynolds looked skeptical. You're suggesting that someone else poisoned Mrs. Bennet, then broke into Mrs. Bennet's house to plant evidence. I'm suggesting that the timeline and circumstances don't support the conclusion that my client is guilty of this crime. But I could see in Detective Reynolds' eyes that he'd already made up his mind. To him, I was a wealthy old woman who had tried to murder her daughter-in-law and was now desperately trying to blame her innocent son. Mrs. Bennet, Detective Reynolds said, based on the evidence we've gathered, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. As the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, I looked at Samuel and saw my own fears reflected in his eyes. Andrew and Victoria had played this perfectly, and I was about to pay the price for underestimating my own family. But as they led me toward the patrol car, one thought kept me from despair. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd left me alive. And as long as I was breathing, I wasn't finished fighting. The county jail was everything I'd expected and worse: gray concrete walls, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look dead, and the constant sound of metal doors slamming shut. I'd sent enough criminals to places like this during my career, but experiencing it firsthand was profoundly different. My cellmate was a woman named Maria Diaz, arrested for check fraud and surprisingly philosophical about the experience. First time, she asked as I tried to make myself comfortable on the narrow bunk. Unfortunately, yes. What did they get you for? They think I tried to poison my daughter-in-law. Maria whistled low. Family drama. That's always the messiest kind of crime. I didn't do it. Honey, everybody in here didn't do it. But the real question is, can you prove you didn't do it? That was exactly the question keeping me awake at night. Samuel had warned me that proving innocence was much harder than establishing reasonable doubt, especially when the evidence was as seemingly solid as what they'd assembled against me. The bail hearing was set for Monday morning, 3 days away. Samuel was confident he could get me released, but the prosecution was arguing that I was a flight risk due to my substantial wealth and that I posed a danger to potential witnesses. The district attorney is treating this like a high-profile case, Samuel explained during one of his visits. They think convicting a wealthy oil heiress will be good publicity. What about our investigation into Andrew and Victoria? Jonathan is making progress, but it's slow going. We've confirmed that Andrew has significant gambling debts, over $300,000 to some very unsavory people. That gives him clear motive for needing money quickly. $300,000. The number staggered me. How did he accumulate that kind of debt? High-stakes poker games, sports betting, some kind of cryptocurrency speculation that went wrong. The point is, he was desperate enough to do something drastic. What about Victoria? Samuel's expression darkened. That's where it gets interesting. Victoria Bennet doesn't exist. I felt my pulse quicken. What do you mean? The identity is fake, created about 4 years ago with forged documents and a fabricated background. Jonathan traced her real identity to a woman named Naomi Jackson who has a criminal record in 3 states. What kind of record? Identity theft, fraud. And get this, suspected involvement in the suspicious death of an elderly man in Arizona. The case was never prosecuted due to lack of evidence, but the pattern is clear. Suddenly, everything made sense. Andrew hadn't just married a beautiful woman. He'd married a professional criminal who specialized in exactly the kind of scheme they tried to pull on me. So, this was planned from the beginning. It looks that way. Naomi probably targeted Andrew because of his family wealth, then manipulated him into helping her gain access to you. But why try to kill me? Why not just wait for me to die naturally and inherit everything? Samuel pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Because Andrew isn't your heir anymore. I stared at him in confusion. What are you talking about? Jonathan did some digging into your estate planning. 3 months ago, you updated your will to establish a charitable foundation instead of leaving everything to Andrew. If you died today, Andrew would inherit nothing. The memory came flooding back. I'd been concerned about Andrew's spending habits and his series of failed business ventures. My estate attorney had suggested creating a foundation that would provide Andrew with a comfortable income while ensuring the bulk of the Bennet fortune would be used for charitable purposes. Andrew knows about the will change, Samuel continued. Your attorney's office confirmed that Andrew called asking about your estate plans about 6 weeks ago. So, he knew that killing me wouldn't get him the inheritance. Right. But if you were convicted of attempting to murder Victoria, the will could be challenged on grounds of mental incompetence or criminal behavior. Andrew could argue that you weren't of sound mind when you changed the will. The complexity of their plan was staggering. They hadn't just tried to kill me. They'd tried to destroy my reputation and mental competency so that Andrew could inherit my fortune even after I'd specifically disinherited him. "There's more," Samuel said. "We found evidence that Andrew has been taking out loans against his expected inheritance. He owes money to several legitimate lenders and some very illegitimate ones. If he doesn't inherit your estate, he's not just broke. He's in physical danger from the people he owes money to." "That explains the desperation," I said softly, thinking of the wild look in Andrew's eyes when I'd refused his request for money. "These aren't the kind of creditors who accept payment plans." "Exactly." I spent that night staring at the ceiling of my cell, processing the full scope of Andrew and Naomi's betrayal. My son hadn't just been greedy. He'd been desperate. And desperate people were capable of anything. But knowledge was power, and now I had the ammunition I needed to fight back. "Maria," I said to my cellmate around 2:00 a.m., "what do you know about getting revenge on people who try to destroy your life?" She rolled over and looked at me with new interest. "Honey, that depends on how far you're willing to go and how much money you've got to spend. I have more money than I know what to do with, and after what they've put me through, I'm willing to go pretty far." Maria smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "In that case, you and I need to have a very interesting conversation." Maria turned out to be a treasure trove of information about how the criminal underworld operated. As a check fraud specialist, she'd worked with various criminal enterprises and understood their structures and motivations. "Your son owes money to loan sharks, right?" she asked. "Those guys don't play. They'll break your legs first, then work their way up to more valuable body parts. Can we use that somehow?" Maria tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Maybe. But you need to be careful. These people don't have rules like we do. If you start playing in their sandbox, you might get buried in it." She paused, then added, "But there's a guy, Eduardo Ramirez. He specializes in information. If you can get word to him on the outside, he might be able to find out exactly who your son owes and how deep he's in." I filed the name away, planning to pass it to Jonathan as soon as possible. The bail hearing was a media circus. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse, and reporters shouted questions as Samuel escorted me through the crowd. "Oil heiress accused of poisoning daughter-in-law" was the headline on every local news station, and I could see the story spreading to national outlets. Andrew and Victoria were in the courtroom, sitting in the front row with their attorney. Victoria looked appropriately frail and victimized, while Andrew played the role of the devastated son torn between loyalty to his mother and justice for his wife. Judge Patricia Williams presided over the hearing with the no-nonsense efficiency I remembered from my prosecutorial days. She listened to the arguments from both sides, reviewed the evidence, and set bail at $2 million, high enough to make a statement, but not so high as to be punitive. "The defendant will surrender her passport and submit to electronic monitoring," Judge Williams announced. "She is not to have any contact with the alleged victim or any witnesses in this case." As I was processed for release, Samuel pulled me aside with urgent news. "The FBI is getting involved," he said quietly. "Jonathan's information about Naomi Jackson caught their attention. They've been tracking her for years, but she always managed to stay one step ahead. This might be their chance to finally catch her." A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. If the FBI was investigating Naomi, they might uncover evidence that would exonerate me. What does this mean for my case? It's complicated. The local charges won't go away immediately, but if the FBI can prove that Naomi has a pattern of similar crimes, it strengthens our defense considerably. As I left the courthouse with an electronic monitoring bracelet around my ankle, I caught sight of Andrew watching me from across the parking lot. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected: fear. He was afraid of me. Good. He should be. That evening, I sat in my study with an electronic monitoring bracelet around my ankle, feeling like a prisoner in my own home. The media attention had been overwhelming, reporters camping outside my gates, helicopters circling overhead, and a constant stream of phone calls from journalists wanting my side of the story. I refused all interviews, but I watched the coverage with growing anger. Andrew was giving carefully orchestrated statements to sympathetic reporters, painting himself as the tragic son of a mentally unstable mother who'd finally snapped under the pressure of aging and wealth. My mother has been increasingly paranoid over the past year, Andrew told Channel 5 News, his expression a perfect mask of concern. She's made accusations against multiple family members and friends, claiming they're after her money. I think the stress of managing such a large estate has affected her judgment. It was a masterful performance designed to support the prosecution's theory that I was suffering from age-related mental decline that had led to irrational and violent behavior. But Andrew had made one crucial mistake. In his eagerness to appear on television, he'd revealed that he and Victoria were still in the area. The interview had been conducted at a local hotel, which meant they hadn't fled as far as we'd thought. I called Samuel immediately. "Did you see Andrew's interview?" "I saw it. Jonathan is already working with the FBI to trace their location." "Samuel, I want to end this. All of it. I'm tired of being reactive. It's time to go on the offensive." "What did you have in mind?" "I've been thinking about this since my conversation with Maria in jail. I want to set a trap. Use myself as bait to draw them out into the open." "Gloria, that's incredibly dangerous. If Naomi Jackson is willing to commit murder, she won't hesitate to try again." "That's exactly what I'm counting on." The plan I outlined to Samuel was elegant in its simplicity. We would leak information suggesting that I'd hidden evidence that could clear my name. Documents or recordings that proved Andrew and Victoria had framed me. The bait would be irresistible to them because as long as that evidence existed, they would never be safe. "They'll have to come after me," I explained. "Either to steal the evidence or to silence me before I can use it. And when they do, the FBI will be waiting." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "This is either brilliant or suicidal. I'm not sure which. After what they've put me through, I'm not sure I care." Jonathan arrived at my house later that evening, bringing with him Special Agent Diana Chen of the FBI. "Mrs. Bennett," Agent Chen said, shaking my hand firmly. "I've been tracking Naomi Jackson for 3 years. She's elusive and extremely dangerous." "Tell me everything you know about her," I said, leading them into my study. Agent Chen opened a file folder on my desk, spreading out photographs of a woman I recognized as Victoria, but with different hair colors, styles, and even subtle alterations to her appearance in each image. Naomi Jackson, born Naomi Williams in Chicago, 1988. She started with identity theft and credit card fraud in her teens, then graduated to more sophisticated cons. For the past decade, she's specialized in what we call inheritance fraud, targeting wealthy individuals through their heirs. She pointed to a photograph of an elderly man. Harold Donovan, 78 Phoenix, Arizona. Naomi married his son Robert, and 6 months later, Harold died of apparent heart failure. Toxicology initially showed nothing suspicious, but when we exhumed the body 2 years later, we found traces of a sophisticated poison that mimics heart attack symptoms. By then, Robert and Naomi had disappeared with approximately $3.2 million, Jonathan added. Agent Chen nodded. "We've identified at least 7 similar cases across multiple states. Her pattern is consistent. She finds a wealthy family, seduces the heir, isolates them from other family members, then eliminates the primary wealth holder. But there's something different about this case," I pointed out. "In the others, she married the son and then killed the parent. Here, she tried to kill me but framed herself as the victim." "That's because of your will change," Jonathan explained. "When you cut Andrew out of your inheritance, they had to adapt their strategy. And there's something else unusual," Agent Chen added. "In previous cases, Naomi abandoned her husbands after securing the money, usually leaving them to take the fall for any suspicious activity. But she's stayed with your son for nearly 4 years. Why?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your fortune is significantly larger than her previous targets," Agent Chen said. "And the oil business provides ongoing income, not just a one-time payout. She's playing the long game with you." The thought of this woman manipulating my son for years made my blood boil. Has Andrew been complicit in her previous crimes? Agent Chen and Jonathan exchanged glances. We don't know for certain, Jonathan said carefully. But given the evidence we've uncovered about his gambling debts and financial dealings, it's likely he's been aware of her activities for some time. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing this information. My son wasn't just caught in a criminal's web. He was an active participant in her schemes. What about the poisoning? I asked. How did they get the cyanide? That's where it gets interesting, Agent Chen Sar said. We traced a purchase of sodium cyanide to a chemical supply company in Houston 3 weeks ago. The buyer used a false ID, but the surveillance footage clearly shows Naomi Jackson making the purchase. So we have proof she bought the poison, I said, feeling a surge of hope. Yes, but it's not enough to clear you completely, Agent Chen cautioned. We still need to establish that she was the one who administered it and planted evidence in your home. Which brings us back to my plan, I said. We need to draw them out, force them to incriminate themselves. Agent Chen nodded slowly. Your idea has merit, Mrs. Bennett, but it's extremely risky. Naomi Jackson has killed at least 7 people that we know of. She wouldn't hesitate to make you number 8. I understand the risks, but I'm not willing to spend the rest of my life fighting these false charges or hiding from my own son. I want this to end. After 2 hours of discussion, we finalized our plan. The FBI would set up surveillance in and around my house, with agents posing as gardeners and security personnel. They would monitor all approaches and have teams ready to intervene at the first sign of danger. Meanwhile, Jonathan would use his media contacts to leak information suggesting that I had discovered evidence proving my innocence, specifically a recording from my home security system that had captured Andrew planting the poison vial in my bathroom. The leak needs to be specific enough to be believable, but vague enough that they'll need to come here to find out exactly what we have. Jonathan explained. And you're absolutely certain you want to do this? Samuel asked me one final time. I thought of the betrayal in Andrew's eyes, of Victoria's smug expression as she accused me of poisoning her, of the cell I'd spent 3 nights in because of their lies. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The leak was carefully orchestrated through Jonathan's media contacts. By the next morning, rumors were circulating that Gloria Bennett had discovered evidence proving her innocence and was planning to present it to authorities within 48 hours. The story was vague enough to be believable, but specific enough to create urgency. Breaking Bennett Oil, heiress claims new evidence will exonerate her, read the headline on the local news website. The article quoted an anonymous source close to Mrs. Bennett, saying that security footage from the Bennett estate would prove that evidence had been planted. If Andrew and Victoria thought I had evidence that could expose them, they would have to act quickly. All I had to do was wait for them to come to me. The waiting was the hardest part. For 2 days. I went through the motions of normal life while wearing a wire and knowing that FBI agents were positioned around my property. Every phone call could be the setup for an ambush. Every visitor could be a potential assassin. Samuel had wanted to evacuate me to a safe house, but I'd insisted on staying at the estate. If Andrew and Victoria were going to make a move, it would be on familiar ground where they felt confident, and I appeared vulnerable. During these tense days of waiting, Agent Chen shared more details about Naomi Jackson's background that helped me understand the woman who had nearly destroyed my life. She grew up in poverty, Agent Chen explained as we sat in my kitchen, which had been swept for bugs twice that morning. Father unknown, mother a drug addict who died when Naomi was 14. She spent 4 years in foster care, where she was reportedly abused. That explains her behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. I said, no, it doesn't. What's fascinating about Naomi is her intelligence. She scored in the genius range on IQ tests administered during her brief stint in juvenile detention, with different opportunities. She could have been a doctor, lawyer, or scientist. Instead, she chose to use that intelligence to destroy lives. Agent Chen nodded. People like Naomi see the world differently than we do. To her, other people are just tools or obstacles. Your son was a tool, her access point to your fortune. You were an obstacle to be removed. And now I'm bait, I said with a grim smile. Carefully protected bait, Agent Chen reminded me, tapping the bulletproof vest I wore beneath my blouse. On the 3rd day, Jonathan called with new information that made my heart sink even further. Gloria, we've been tracing Andrew's financial dealings, and it's worse than we thought. He didn't just borrow against his expected inheritance. He sold percentages of it. How is that even possible? He can't sell what he doesn't have. He created a company called Bennett Future Holdings and sold shares in it to various investors. The company's only asset was the projected value of Andrew's inheritance from you. That's not just unethical. It's fraud, I said, my prosecutor's mind immediately cataloging the potential charges. Exactly. And some of his investors are very dangerous people. One in particular, James Morozov, is connected to organized crime. He invested $150,000 in exchange for a promised return of $450,000 once you died. I felt sick. So Andrew literally sold my death to a mobster. It appears that way, and Morozov isn't known for his patience or understanding when investments don't pay off. The pieces were falling into place now. Andrew's desperate need for money, his increasing agitation, the rushed timeline of the poisoning attempt, it all made sense. He wasn't just trying to get rich. He was trying to stay alive. Jonathan, we need to find out if Morozov is putting pressure on Andrew directly. That might explain why they're still in town instead of fleeing. I'll see what I can dig up. In the meantime, stay alert. People backed into corners are at their most dangerous. That evening, as I reviewed the security camera footage from the previous day, I noticed something strange. A van from a local florist had delivered flowers to my front gate, except I hadn't ordered any flowers, and my security team hadn't reported a delivery. I rewound the footage and zoomed in on the driver. Though he wore a cap pulled low over his face, I recognized Andrew's profile immediately. They were already watching the house, testing our security protocols and looking for weaknesses. The trap was working. Now I just had to survive it. I called Agent Chen immediately. They're doing reconnaissance. Andrew delivered fake flowers today to check our security. We saw it, she confirmed. We have agents following him now. He's currently at the Lakeside Hotel with Victoria. They've been arguing for the past hour, according to our surveillance team. What are they arguing about? We can't get close enough to hear clearly, but based on body language, it looks intense. Victoria seems to be pressuring Andrew to do something, and he's resistant. I could imagine the scene. Naomi pushing my son to act quickly, to eliminate the threat I posed, while Andrew hesitated at the thought of directly harming his mother. Despite everything, I hoped there was still some small part of him that remembered the woman who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally. But I couldn't count on that sentiment to protect me. The financial pressure from Morozov, combined with the threat of FBI investigation, would eventually overcome any lingering filial affection. Andrew and Victoria would make their move soon. Let's increase security tonight, I suggested. Make it obvious. I want them to think twice. Maybe delay until tomorrow. Why? Agent Chen asked. Because tomorrow is the anniversary of Richard's death. Andrew knows I always visit the cemetery in the morning. It would be the perfect opportunity for them to break in while I'm gone. Or to ambush you at the cemetery, Agent Chen pointed out. Either way, it gives us a chance to control the situation. We can prepare for both scenarios. Agent Chen agreed, and we spent the next several hours revising our plans. Additional FBI agents were stationed around my property, now openly visible as security personnel. Others would accompany me to the cemetery, disguised as fellow mourners but armed and ready for trouble. That night, I tried to sleep but found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about Andrew as a child, his first steps, his gap-toothed smile when he lost his front teeth, the way he'd clung to me on his first day of kindergarten. Where had that sweet boy gone? At what point had he turned into a man capable of matricide? Perhaps the seeds had always been there, planted by Richard's materialistic values and fertilized by the privilege of wealth without responsibility. Or perhaps Naomi had corrupted him completely, turning his weaknesses into weapons against his own family. It didn't matter now. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me only as an obstacle to wealth. Tomorrow would determine whether either of us had a future. As dawn broke, I dressed in black as I always did for these cemetery visits, a ritual I'd maintained for 5 years since Richard's death. Despite our troubled marriage and divorce, Andrew would expect me to maintain this pattern, especially with the eyes of the media on me. The microphone is working perfectly, Agent Chen confirmed. adjusting the tiny device hidden in my pearl necklace. And the tracking device is active. She tapped the watch on my wrist. Remember, Mrs. Bennett, do not engage directly with Andrew or Victoria if you see them. Signal our team and move to a safe distance. Your only job is to stay alive. I nodded, though we both knew I might not have the luxury of following that advice if things went wrong. As I drove to the cemetery, followed discreetly by FBI vehicles, I felt strangely calm. After days of tension and fear, the prospect of finally confronting this situation brought a certain peace. One way or another, this nightmare would end today. The cemetery was quiet in the early morning light, dew still clinging to the grass between the headstones. I made my way to Richard's grave, aware of the FBI agents positioned strategically around the perimeter, appearing to be ordinary visitors paying respects to their own departed loved ones. I placed the white roses I'd brought on Richard's headstone and stood in silence, thinking not of my ex-husband, but of the son we had raised together. Had Richard seen something in Andrew that I had missed? Had he known what our son might become? A twig snapped behind me, and I turned to see Andrew standing 10 feet away, alone and looking haggard. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly as he stepped closer. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." I looked at my son, standing before me in the cemetery where his father was buried, and felt a complex mix of emotions: love, betrayal, anger, and a deep, aching sadness for what might have been. "I don't think that's a good idea, Andrew," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My attorney advised against any contact with you." "Please," Andrew said, taking another step forward. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I noticed he was scanning the cemetery, his eyes darting to each of the other mourners, the FBI agents in disguise. Did he suspect, or was he looking for Victoria? "Where's your wife?" I asked pointedly. Something flickered across Andrew's face. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "She's not feeling well. The poisoning affected her more than the doctors initially thought." "How convenient." Andrew flinched at my tone but pressed on. "Mom, I know what you think happened, but you're wrong. Victoria and I had nothing to do with the poison. Someone is setting all of us up." I almost laughed at the audacity of his lie. "Is that what you came here to tell me, more lies?" "I'm telling you the truth," he insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "You have to believe me. We're all in danger." "From whom?" "Andrew. The loan sharks you owe money to, the investors you defrauded with your fake inheritance company, or your wife, whose real name is Naomi Jackson and who has killed at least 7 people before you." Andrew's face went pale. "How do you know about Naomi, or about Bennett Future Holdings, or about James Morozov, who expects a $450,000 return on his investment in your mother's death?" Andrew staggered backward as if I'd struck him. "Mom, I can explain." "Save it," I cut him off. "The FBI knows everything. They've been tracking Naomi for years, and now they're closing in on both of you. The only question is whether you're going to prison for fraud or for attempted murder." Andrew's eyes widened, and he looked around again, this time with obvious panic. "You're working with the FBI. Are they here now? What do you think?" He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "You don't understand the situation I'm in. Morozov will kill me if I don't pay him back. And that justifies trying to murder your own mother." "I never wanted to hurt you," Andrew said, his voice breaking. "It was Naomi's idea. She said it would be painless, that you'd just go to sleep and never wake up. But then you switched the cups somehow, and everything went wrong." I stared at my son, unable to believe what I was hearing. "And that makes it better that you thought you were killing me painlessly." "I was desperate." Andrew's voice rose, drawing glances from the nearby FBI agents. "Morozov threatened to break my legs, to hurt Victoria. He showed me pictures of what he did to the last person who couldn't pay. I was terrified." "So you decided that my life was worth less than your kneecaps." Andrew had the decency to look ashamed. "I didn't see another way out. I asked you for the money, but you refused." "Because I knew you were lying about what it was for," I said. "If you had told me the truth about the danger you were in, I might have helped you." "Would you have?" Andrew asked, suddenly bitter. You've never approved of anything I've done. You changed your will to cut me out completely. I changed my will to protect you from yourself, I corrected him. The foundation would have provided you with a generous income while preventing you from squandering the entire fortune. I was trying to give you a chance to find purpose beyond money. Andrew shook his head. It's too late for that now. Victoria Naomi, she's not who I thought she was either. What do you mean? He glanced over his shoulder nervously. She's planning to kill me too, Mom, once she gets the money. I found her research on untraceable poisons, notes about A's life insurance and offshore accounts in her name only. She never loved me. I was just her access to your fortune. I felt a flicker of pity for my son, caught in a web partly of his own making. Andrew, it's not too late to do the right thing. Help the FBI catch Naomi. Testify against her. You can still salvage something from this wreckage. He looked at me with desperate hope. Would you help me if I cooperate? Would you speak up for me with the prosecutors? Before I could answer, a voice called from behind Andrew. Andrew, what are you doing? Victoria stood at the cemetery entrance, dressed immaculately in a black pantsuit that looked more appropriate for a business meeting than a graveyard visit, even from a distance. I could see the cold fury in her expression. Victoria, Andrew said, turning toward her with obvious fear. I was just saying goodbye to your mother. Victoria finished for him, striding toward us with purpose. We discussed this, honey. Your emotions are clouding your judgment. She's manipulating you, just like she always has. Victoria reached us and placed a possessive hand on Andrew's arm. Up close, I could see the calculating intelligence behind her eyes, assessing the situation and adapting her strategy in real time. Mrs. Bennett, she said with false warmth, you're looking well for someone under such stress. I'm surprised your doctors allow you to be out alone, given your condition. I'm in perfect health. Victoria, or should I call you Naomi? Her smile never faltered, but her eyes hardened to flint. I don't know what Andrew's been telling you, but he's been under tremendous strain. The doctors prescribed medication for his anxiety, but I'm afraid he hasn't been taking it regularly. Stop it, Victoria, Andrew said, pulling away from her. No more lies. She knows everything about your real identity, about the other men you married, about the people you killed. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. Then she laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. Oh, Andrew, you really are as weak as your father was. She turned to me, dropping all pretense. And you, Gloria, you've been a worthy opponent. I'm almost sad it has to end this way. Her hand moved to her purse, and I tensed, knowing she was likely armed. The FBI agents began moving closer, but they were still too far away to intervene immediately. It's over, Naomi, I said, using her real name deliberately. The FBI has been building a case against you for years. They know about Harold Donovan in Phoenix, about Martin Williams in Santa Fe, about all of them. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. You're bluffing. Why do you think we're having this conversation in a public place? Look around you. As Victoria glanced around, several of the mourners began moving toward us with purpose, their hands shifting to their jackets where their weapons were concealed. You set a trap, she said, her voice filled with grudging respect. I learned from the best, I replied. You taught me how effective a good trap can be when you tried to frame me for your poisoning. Victoria's hand emerged from her purse holding not a gun, but a syringe. Always have a backup plan. Gloria, that's something you should have learned as well. She lunged toward me with startling speed, the syringe aimed at my neck. I stumbled backward, tripping over a headstone and falling hard to the ground. Victoria followed, her face twisted with determination. Stop, FBI! Shouted Agent Chen, racing toward us with her weapon drawn. But Victoria was already on top of me, the needle of the syringe gleaming in the morning light. I grabbed her wrist with both hands, struggling to keep the needle away from my skin. You should have died when you were supposed to, Victoria hissed, her strength surprising as she forced the needle closer to my neck. And you should have picked a different family, I grunted, summoning strength I didn't know I had and twisting her wrist sharply. Victoria cried out in pain but didn't release the syringe. We struggled on the ground, rolling over the damp grass as FBI agents surrounded us, unable to shoot for fear of hitting me. "Drop the weapon now," Agent Chen commanded, her gun aimed at Victoria's head. In that moment of distraction, I drove my knee up into Victoria's stomach. She gasped, her grip on the syringe loosening just enough for me to wrench it from her hand and throw it aside. FBI agents swarmed in, pulling Victoria off me and forcing her to the ground. As they handcuffed her, she locked eyes with me one last time. "This isn't over, Gloria," she spat. "Not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," I said, rising shakily to my feet. "You lost the moment you underestimated me." As they led Victoria away, I turned to find Andrew standing frozen, watching the scene with horror. 2 FBI agents approached him, handcuffs ready. "Andrew Bennett, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering," one of them announced. "You have the right to remain silent." Andrew didn't resist as they cuffed him. As they led him past me toward their vehicle, he paused. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry. I never thought it would go this far." I looked at my son, the boy I had raised, the man he had become, the stranger he was now, and felt nothing but a profound sadness. "I'm sorry too, Andrew," I said softly, "for whatever part I played in creating the man who could do this." As they led him away, I stood alone among the headstones, the morning sun warming my face, and felt the weight of the past weeks finally begin to lift. It wasn't over. There would be trials and testimony, public scrutiny and private grief, but the immediate danger had passed. I had survived. And more than that, I had fought back and won. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Naomi Jackson receive 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders she had committed across multiple states. The evidence against her was overwhelming: DNA, fingerprints, financial records, and most damning of all, the recorded confession she'd made during our confrontation at the cemetery. Andrew received 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. His cooperation with authorities and testimony against Naomi had spared him from a life sentence, but he would be an old man by the time he was released. As they led him away in shackles, he turned to look at me one last time. I saw remorse in his eyes, perhaps genuine, perhaps just regret at being caught. Either way, it was too late for us. The son I had raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who had been willing to murder me for money. The media had turned me from suspected murderer into heroic victim overnight. "Oil Harris helps FBI catch serial killer" was much better publicity than my original headlines, and the offers for book deals, movie rights, and interviews were pouring in. I declined them all. Some stories were too personal to share with the world. Samuel had done an excellent job managing the legal aftermath. All charges against me were dropped. My reputation was restored, and I was free to return to my quiet life on the estate. But quiet wasn't what I wanted anymore. Using my considerable resources and Jonathan's law enforcement connections, I'd spent the past 6 months establishing the Bennett Justice Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting elderly victims of financial crimes and abuse. The foundation worked closely with law enforcement to identify and prosecute those who preyed on vulnerable seniors, while also providing resources to help victims rebuild their lives. The work gave me purpose and helped transform my personal tragedy into something positive. Each time we helped an elderly person reclaim their dignity and security, I felt a small measure of healing in my own heart. I also made significant changes to my will and the structure of Bennett Oil. The company would eventually be employee-owned, with profits shared among those who actually did the work rather than flowing to distant shareholders. The bulk of my personal fortune would go to the Justice Foundation, with smaller bequests to various charities that had meaning to me. One evening, as I sat in my study reviewing applications for the Foundation's Victim Support Program, Martha announced an unexpected visitor. "Mrs. Bennett, there's a young woman here to see you. She says her name is Lisa Donovan." The name rang a bell immediately. Donovan was the last name of one of Naomi's previous victims in Arizona. "Send her in, please." Lisa Donovan was in her early 30s, with her father's eyes and a wary expression that spoke of hard-won caution. She stood awkwardly in the doorway of my study, clutching a small handbag. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I've been following your case, and, well, we have something in common. Your father was Harold Donovan," I said gently. "Naomi Jackson's first victim." Lisa nodded, blinking back tears. "When I saw the news about your case, it was like everything finally made sense. For years, I knew something was wrong about Dad's death, but no one would listen. They all thought I was just a grieving daughter who couldn't accept a natural death." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Please, sit down. Would you like some tea?" Over the next hour, Lisa shared her story, how her brother Robert had brought home his new girlfriend Naomi, the whirlwind romance that followed, and the subtle ways Naomi had begun isolating their father from family and friends. After Dad died, they took the money and disappeared. Robert stopped answering my calls, and when I finally tracked him down a year later, he was living in a motel, drinking himself to death. Naomi had left him once the money was gone. "I'm so sorry," I said, recognizing the pain of betrayal in her eyes. When they arrested Naomi, I felt vindicated but also empty. It doesn't bring Dad back. It doesn't heal the damage she did to our family. No, it doesn't, I agreed. Justice is cold comfort sometimes. Lisa hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly brought her here. How do you do it? How do you move forward after someone you trusted completely betrays you? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. I wish I had a simple answer. For me, it's been about finding purpose in the pain, creating something meaningful from this experience so that others might be spared what we went through. I told her about the Bennett Justice Foundation and our work with elderly victims of fraud and abuse. Actually, I said, struck by a sudden thought, we're looking for someone to head our victim advocacy program, someone who understands firsthand what our clients are going through. Would you be interested? Lisa's eyes widened. Me, but I don't have any experience in you have the most important kind of experience, I interrupted gently. You know what it's like to be ignored when you're trying to protect someone you love. You know the pain of betrayal and the long road to healing afterward. That's worth more than any degree or certification. For the first time since she'd entered my study, Lisa smiled. I'd like that. I'd like to help other people make sense of what happened to them. As Lisa left with an appointment to return and discuss the position further, I felt a sense of rightness that had been missing since this ordeal began. I couldn't change what Andrew and Naomi had done, but I could change what happened next, not just for myself, but for others like Lisa and her father. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from Andrew. It was full of apologies, explanations, and desperate pleas for forgiveness. He claimed that Naomi had manipulated him, that he never intended for things to go so far, that he still loved me despite everything that had happened. I read the letter twice, then fed it into my fireplace. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. Some wounds never heal. Andrew had chosen Naomi and her blood money over the mother who'd given him everything, and now he could live with the consequences of that choice. The foundation grew rapidly over the next year, expanding to 3 states and helping hundreds of elderly victims reclaim their dignity and security. I found myself traveling frequently, speaking at conferences and meeting with law enforcement agencies about better protecting vulnerable seniors. On the anniversary of the cemetery confrontation, I visited Richard's grave again, this time with proper security and no hidden agendas. As I placed white roses on his headstone, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The Bennett name would survive, but it would be associated with justice and compassion rather than the kind of family dysfunction that Andrew and Naomi had represented. The oil derricks still pumped their black gold, but now that wealth flowed to employees who had earned it and to causes that deserved it. As for me, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, the ability to face betrayal, fight back against impossible odds, and emerge not just surviving, but thriving. The lonely widow in a too-large mansion had been replaced by a woman with purpose, surrounded by colleagues who shared her mission and friends who valued her for herself. not her money. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my home for the foundation staff, a celebration of our first year and the lives we'd changed. As I looked around at these people who had become my new family, I raised my glass in a toast. To second chances, I said, and to the truth that sometimes we find our greatest strength in our darkest moments. Later, as the guests departed and the house grew quiet, I stood on my terrace watching the sunset paint the oil derricks in gold and crimson. A year ago, I had been fighting for my life against the people I should have been able to trust most. Now, I was building a legacy that would help others long after I was gone. Some would call it revenge, this systematic dismantling of everything Andrew and Naomi had tried to achieve. But I preferred to think of it as justice, not just for me, but for Harold Donovan and all the others whose lives had been destroyed by greed and betrayal. I had refused to be a victim. I had fought back with every resource at my disposal. And in doing so, I had discovered that the greatest inheritance I could leave wasn't money or property or even the Bennett name. It was the example of a woman who, at 68, had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into a force for good. That was a legacy worth having. Thank you for following my story to its conclusion. I hope it serves as a reminder that age doesn't determine strength, and that sometimes the most important battles we fight are with those closest to us. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to reinvent yourself after betrayal? Comment below and share your thoughts. And if you enjoyed my story, don't forget to check out 2 other channel favorites, My Daughter Stole My Identity and The Neighbor Who Tried to Steal My House. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to stand up for yourself.